in the quiet fields of the Somerset levels lies a place where history takes flight once more. Middlezoy Aerodrome.
So this is Middlezoy Aerodrome, which is part of the old RAF Western Zoyland.
Once a hive of activity for the Royal Air Force, it played a pivotal role in supporting the Allied forces as they prepared for the decisive invasion of Europe.
And Western Zoyland was commissioned and used by the Royal Air Force from the mid-30s right through until the early 1960s.
It's one of the oldest airfields in the country, dating back to the mid-20s. Once the Americans arrived during the Second World War, more infrastructure appeared, hard runways. It then became a much more developed, more renowned airfield.
Utilised during the war as a training base, and after the war was used for training pilots to fly the Meteor jets.
So the Meteors, Vampires often flew in here from Colmhead.
Thanks to the vision and dedication of father and son, aero engineers Paul and Simon Childs, and ex-RAF Harrier Squadron leader David Linney, Middlezoy Aerodrome was reborn and stands as a testament to their shared commitment where history meets the future of aviation once more.
At Middlezoy you can see a range of aeroplanes, some modern, mostly vintage.
And that's kind of reflected really, the people who fly them are, well, they're aged.
A lot of the guys that are here at Middlezoy are ex-Air Force, Army, Navy pilots, most of whom have worked at some point in their career in the airline industry. At the upper end of the aviation age group, but all have a passion for vintage aircraft, and therefore makes it a more interesting environment, in my opinion.
And with 2024 being the 80th anniversary of D-Day, Middlezoy Aerodrome remembers Western Zoyland's crucial role in the Allied efforts.
When the RAF were here, it served a number of different purposes. It was busy during the D-Day period. It was actually busy just before D-Day with Austers.
The Taylorcraft Auster AOP was a nimble, reliable aircraft used for artillery spotting and reconnaissance during World War II. These lightweight planes provided critical intelligence for Allied forces. Today, numerous examples of the Auster are lovingly kept flying by the International Auster Club. Middlezoy Aerodrome is home to 3 of these historic Austers, all of which saw military service. Marking the 80th anniversary of D-Day, the Auster Club proposed Middlezoy film these iconic aircraft on a historic formation flight. This documentary follows their journey across the English Channel to Normandy to commemorate the vital missions they performed during Operation Overlord.
So the Auster was used by the Royal Artillery, and whilst that may sound unusual, they are RAF aircraft operated by Royal Artillery pilots. And the logic behind them was the artillery fires from the ground and the shells land on the ground, and unless you can see the enemy, you don't know whether your shells are landing where you intend them to. So it was a natural progression from having a ladder or a balloon and to use an aircraft, and you put a spotter, or what was called an observation post, an air observation post, which gives the Auster its military designation. You have an artillery officer in the Auster, and he calls the artillery where to fire the shells. So these aircraft operated and lived with the artillery battalions, who were very, very close to the front line, literally on the front line. So just behind the troops was the artillery, and just behind the artillery was an Auster. And their job every day was to take off, having spoken to the artillery commanders, and find out where the enemy were, so the artillery could then fire the shells onto them.
Many Auster aircraft are still cherished and actively flown by members of the International Auster Club, who are committed to preserving the history and spirit of these iconic wartime planes.
The Auster Club has a long history of going to Falaise in particular. Falaise has a small part of history, particularly just after D-Day. So this year, because of the 80th anniversary, it was decided to try and get as many Austers, of all the different kinds of Austers, to Falaise on around about the 4th of June to stay through to the 7th or 8th.
The 3 pilots of the Middlezoy Austers know the meaning of duty as former servicemen themselves. They have felt the weight of responsibility that comes with wearing the uniform. Their own military service creates a deep bond of the past, one that resonates with the legacy of those RAF Auster pilots who flew into danger during the D-Day actions of 1944.
I was posted to the V-Force, which was not particularly the way I wanted to go, but I went on to the Victor II Blue Steel nuclear bombers. And so I spent 18 months of those, spending a lot of time on cure rain, rushing out to the airplane, sitting there and winding it up with a live nuclear bomb under your backside. And I continued my first tour, if you like, on the Victor, but with a reconnaissance version of the Victor. I was awarded a flying scholarship by the Air Force, which really introduced me to the Auster, because I went to Luton Flying Club, where I flew an Auster, and I learnt to fly on Austers.
Not only the captain of both Cold War bombers and airliners, Mike was also an RAF and Navy pilot instructor and brought in valuable expertise when introducing fellow aviator Martin to flying the Auster.
Well, I've been a pilot ever since I left school. I initially joined the Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm, where I flew helicopters, and after a few years went to the North Sea, where I was flying out to the oil rigs, again on helicopters, and flew for the airlines, and currently I work as a consultant.
So I've been a pilot professionally since I left school, really. I flew in the military for 20-something years, then I became an airline pilot, and the last decade or so I've been a corporate pilot flying business jets. In the military I was a fighter pilot, so I flew fighter jets, Tornadoes in the Royal Air Force, and then transferred to the Royal Navy and flew Sea Harrier fighters.
With decades of military and airline flying experience between them, these three seasoned pilots meticulously plan their tribute flight across the English Channel. But despite their skills, commitment, and the mission's historical significance, they find themselves grounded. The obstacle? A wall of bureaucracy and no-fly zones.
The main purpose of the flight of the Austers here from Middlezoy was to reenact a flight which took place on June the 8th, 1944. It's often said that no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and it's true that our plan changed from the Monday morning when we did our final planning. We were meant to go direct to France. That changed. We ended up going via Kent.
What difference does it make?
We're not staying in Shoreham, so we have a taxi ride and a FAF. You will get there at 11 English, which is 10Z. We're going to 23 miles.
Yeah. Well, Abigail is to know. Right up until the last minute, that was on the cards. The approvals were all issued, and then on the Monday morning, prior to us starting the final preparations for the trip, the French then withdrew the approvals for us to go to Cherbourg on the basis that Cherbourg was too busy, and we then had to replan. Now let's go a bit further down.
So then we need to find somewhere near. Avec beaucoup d'aide.
And we're going tomorrow, yeah? If we go to Dinard, we're going tomorrow.
With the flight plan finally ready, final preparations are underway. And helping crew this extraordinary journey is a fellow aviator at Middlezoy Aerodrome, Dan. A trainee pilot and aviation artist with a keen eye for both the skies and the story. Dan will capture every moment of this historic flight on camera. And lastly, an important fifth member joins the Auster Air crews.
This is a wartime mark size. Outstanding.
A veteran pilot from his years in the British Army joins as a passenger in one of the three Auster aircraft.
Yeah, that looks familiar.
Jerome Mostyn, president of the International Auster Club and a long-serving Auster pilot in the British Army, embarks on a poignant journey crossing the English Channel to honour two fallen airmen.
I'm going to lay the wreaths on the grave of the crew of the first Auster that was shot down after D-Day, D+7 I think. They were hit by ground fire, and unfortunately both killed, and they're buried at Ronville Cemetery, where we're going to lay the wreaths on behalf of the International Auster Club and the AOP Association.
So we were asked on behalf of the AOP squadron to lay a wreath, and also, more importantly, a personal wreath for the observer that lost his life as part of the first crew. His best friend, for every year that he was able, had been there personally to lay a wreath, but unfortunately this year was unable to do so because, having reached the age of 100 and was now living in a retirement home, he was just unable to travel. So we took the wreath on his behalf.
With the wreaths in hand and memories of a shared legacy, Jerome makes his way to France, carrying the weight of their sacrifice and the enduring spirit of those who served.
Just prepping, loading before briefing, and then we'll be off on the first leg.
Good morning, we are Middlezoy flight. When we're with the other people, we are Middlezoy Combine. So just so you know who we all are. Yeah. And the aim of this flight today is to safely get to Sandown, having done a circuit at Old Sarum, and then joined with Navy Wings, Swordfish and Chipmunk to do some photographs near the Isle of Wight, and then on to Sandown.
D-Day landings changed the course of the war, and today, to mark the 80th anniversary in just 2 days' time, a flypast took place across Somerset and Wiltshire to remember the pilots who trained here in our area. Here's Pam Caulfield.
The pilots who flew these Auster scout planes in 1944 were heading right for the front line, unarmed.
And they arrived in Normandy just after D-Day, where they flew and basically spotted the enemy positions for the artillery to give them the coordinates to be able to bombard them and to clear the way for the troops on the beaches.
The flypast went over Old Sarum in Wiltshire, where the squadrons who flew these planes 80 years ago were formed.
So we carried out a flyby at Old Sarum, which is where the AOP squadrons were initially formed, just to pay homage again to the brave pilots that flew in the AOP, which is one branch of aviation during the war that most people don't know an awful lot about.
It was a tribute to the bravery of the pilots, many of whom lost their lives.
Those people who flew those aircraft were defenceless. They were being attacked from aircraft from above, they were being hit by ground defences and artillery, and they flew hour after hour, day after day, and they played such a pivotal role. It's just so emotional to be here and to see those aircraft still flying.
As the 3 Auster aircraft near the Isle of Wight, their destination is more than a waypoint. It's a meeting point with history itself.
The plan was to meet up with a Royal Navy Swordfish aircraft to commemorate and reenact a flight which took place on the 8th of June 1944. That involved 5 or 6 Austers flying across to France, and they were the first military aircraft that were planned to land in France after D-Day. And the idea of following a Navy aircraft, which back then was an aircraft called a walrus, was that most of the pilots had never flown across water, and they'd never actually flown outside of England. So they enlisted the help of the Royal Navy to lead them across the Channel to Normandy.
The distinctive torpedo bomber joining the Austers against the dramatic backdrop of the White Needles rock formations.
And so the Swordfish arrived, which is really how we got those rather nice pictures of the 3 airplanes with the Swordfish.
This fairy Swordfish, restored by the Navy Wings charity, is the last Mark I model still flying.
Highlight for me was meeting up with the Swordfish over the Needles. Amazing. Always one of my childhood favourites. Many an airfix kit of the Swordfish, made badly in my youth.
Known as the string bag, this versatile biplane served heroically in World War II, carrying out daring torpedo attacks against enemy ships. The Austers bid farewell to their Royal Navy escort. The fairy Swordfish peels off into the distance, leaving the historic trio to continue their journey alone. Touching down on the Isle of Wight, the pilots prepare for a brief stop to refuel before pressing on to Lydd.
My aircraft, NJ633, is actually a Normandy veteran. During the renovation, we actually found that it had a replacement wing. And in fact, the right wing of the aircraft was present in Normandy at D-Day +6. The remainder of the aircraft arrived on the squadron in August 1944, and then the aircraft spent the rest of the war with the 21st Army Battle Group through Normandy, Belgium, the Low Countries, and finally ending up the war in Germany just to the north of Düsseldorf.
As the aircraft are refueled, the wind begins to rise and the weather takes a turn for the worse.
We've had to wait it out, this weather to pass through before we can move on to Lydd.
Well, the impression I got was that the front was coming down and just disappearing off to the east, south, sorry, and better behind, and depending where it was meant to be clearing around about midday. It sounds like it's just hung around a bit longer. That's why I thought we were going to get all the way there. As we went east, the weather was disappearing, but obviously it's not quite disappearing as fast as I said.
Okay, let's slow plans.
And so, as the sound of Rolls-Royce Merlin-powered warbirds echoes above, roaring on their way to Normandy, the more fragile Austers wait below.
There's none of this easy stuff.
You need the drama, hey.
But it makes for the documentary.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Isle of Wight holds a vital place in the story of D-Day. Its strategic position in the English Channel made it a critical staging ground for the Allied invasion.
The entry airports into France all were given a quota, and all of the airports closer to Cherbourg and Falaise and the beaches had already met their capacity. So we were forced to replan to fly to Lyd in Kent, and then managed to get approval to enter France through Le Touquet.
The Austers make a blustery landing at Lyd. Their journey paused once more for the night.
It's something lifted. Yeah.
On hearing of the wreaths Jerome is carrying on board and the poignant mission of their flight, Lyd Airport waives their overnight parking fees. Here, they'll batten down against the evening winds.
Our Auster, we discovered it, I suppose, about 4 years ago. It was looking pretty sad. It had belonged to a Navy pilot, but he'd sadly died of cancer. And so the airplane had been in a fairly scruffy hangar for a few years. And so we saw this airplane covered in dirt and filth, flat tyres and all the rest of it. And we decided we could do something with it. I was invited to do the initial air test on it on the basis that I'd flown Austers before. Yeah, in 1963. But the actual aeroplane was built in 1942. It was a very early Auster. Originally, the Air Force would fly the Auster, and the idea was they're going to fly with squadrons air observation posts. But the Army discovered very quickly that their RAF pilots were not particularly good at spotting for artillery. And they decided to train artillery officers to be pilots, which they did. So that aeroplane then formed one of the first AOP squadrons, which was number 654 Squadron. I got their badge here somewhere, yes, up there. And they were formed at Old Sarum. They then went out to North Africa. They were involved at the end of the campaign in North Africa, and then they went to Sicily and then Italy, and they worked their way up through Italy with the armies until the end of the war. And so the airplane's actually got quite a long history of wartime flying. After the Second World War, it was civilianised by the Taylorcraft Aircraft Company who built it. And it was first pilot who bought it was a guy called Louis Strange. And Louis Strange was a famous World War I pilot whose piece de resistance was falling out of an airplane when it was being shot down, dangling from his ammunition thing, while the airplane was in an inverted spin, but managed to get his feet back inside and get under control again. That's why we call it Louis. So we decided to call it Louis in memory really of Louis Strange.
The next morning brings a dramatic improvement in the weather, but time is against them. The French air traffic controllers will soon take a break from English language communication, leaving a narrow window for the Channel crossing. With every aircraft needing fuel and only minutes to spare, it's going to be close.
1:30 and 3 o'clock, close for lunch, okay, so that's no go. Well, we can go in to speak French, and I don't speak French too. No. So we had a land there at 1:30, which is...
Yeah, okay.
12:30 English time, which is 11:30 takeoff.
Is there any sign of the fuel?
We're all waiting for the Bowser here, aren't we? We've just been standing around enjoying a bit of fresh air, waiting for the Bowser to turn up. But, it could be worse. It was really blowing a gale through here last night, wasn't it? And now it's quite pleasant.
Mind you, it helped us on our way.
So crossing the channel was the first for me. So not only a first crossing, but about 5 hours of experience by that point on the Auster.
I was conscious that I was flying an 80-year-old aeroplane, and as soon as the engine knew it was over the water, obviously it decides to falter and cough a little just to make you realise that you are over the water.
The weather was good. The advantage we had going from Lyd across to Le Touquet was we were crossing the shortest part.
But it's only 23 miles from where we were to France, and so my idea was to lead the formation, and because it's a busy seaway, I actually weaved across. So my idea was I'd fly in front of any ships. We were 2,000 feet above the water, and my logic was if any of us had a problem, we would land in the water in front of any ship.
But anyway, we got across the channel without any great difficulty, and Tim was working the radio to find out that the English-speaking controller, I believe, was still at lunch.
Having successfully crossed the English Channel and circling patiently until the English-speaking controller returned from lunch, the Austers touched down in France. As the build-up to the D-Day commemoration approaches, the Austers are soon joined by other World War II-era Allied aircraft, also stopping here before their journey to Normandy. Le Touquet, now a serene coastal town, bears scars from its role in the Allied deception efforts of Operation Overlord. In the diversionary assault preceding the D-Day landings, known as Operation Glimmer, over 2,000 bombs were dropped on Le Touquet in June 1944.
As Allied heavy and medium bombers, following in the wake of Bomber Command, send down their share of the 20,000 tons of bombs dropped in the 24 hours preceding the landings. The softening up of the German defences along a broad stretch of coast.
The Allied air raids intended to draw German attention away from Normandy left the city heavily damaged, a high price paid in the larger strategy of liberation. The crews clear customs quickly, topping up their tanks and readying for the next leg of their journey.
My Auster was made in 1945, just missed the Second World War, but she was a military Auster and she served in 1952. In 1952 she was bought back by the Auster Company and converted to a civilian Auster. They changed the engine, changed the paint scheme and put bigger seats in the back, and it spent its life as an instructional aeroplane. People ran out of interest in it and she was parked in a hangar and left to moulder and rot for quite a long time. Keen gentleman brought her back to life, put a new engine on her, recovered her, refitted all the old instruments, and in 2015 she flew again for the first time for nearly 40 years. I bought her in 2017 and she's lived here at Middlezoy since 2021. Well, I like all kind of flying. I enjoyed my time as a fighter pilot, both in the RAF and the Navy. I enjoyed my time as an airline pilot. I still enjoy my life as a business jet pilot, but throughout all of my flying, I started flying small, slow piston engine aircraft. And now in the twilight of my career, I find it exciting, interesting, stimulating to carry on flying them.
Skyward once more, the Austers glide over the beautiful French landscape, making their way to Dieppe. But as the afternoon wears on and they touch down, an unexpected quiet greets them. The airfield lies still, with no one in sight.
We are in Dieppe, and we seem to be the only people here. It's 5:30 French time, so everyone may have gone home. And Martin could probably do some more fuel.
Fortunately, after a few calls, a local hand arrives to help refuel Martin's shorter range Auster. Seeing the opportunity, Mike decides to top up his fuel as well, ensuring they're ready for the final leg of the journey to Falaise, where they will join the rest of the gathered aircraft from the International Auster Club.
So we're going there, which is, this is all Deauville inside here.
Right, so we're outside of that.
Deauville. This is Nord Rennes information here.
The stripes on my aircraft are described as Normandy stripes rather than the D-Day stripes. For D-Day itself, the directive came out that all Allied aircraft had to have the black and white stripes applied, which was, for a lot of aircraft, done the night before using whitewash and black paint with paintbrushes and rollers. However, shortly after arriving in Normandy, the High Command realised that having black and white stripes on the top surfaces of the wings, particularly for the AOP squadrons where they were right behind the front line, stood out very clearly for the enemy fighters. So a directive came out that the top surfaces were to be painted back into camouflage and the stripes just remain on the lower surfaces, so the Allied troops could see that the aircraft were friendly and hopefully wouldn't fire upon them.
Once a battlefield, now a place of memory and reflection. Today, Falaise stands as a powerful symbol of the courage and sacrifice of those who fought to secure freedom across Europe. A fitting place for these Austers to complete their journey in tribute to the heroes of D-Day.
Yes. I won't mention to anybody else that I landed on a taxi.
Falaise, now a quiet town in Normandy, was central to the closing chapter of Operation Overlord. In August 1944, it became the site of the Falaise Pocket, a fierce encirclement that marked the beginning of the end for German forces in France. Allied troops trapped thousands of German soldiers, halting their retreat and dealing a decisive blow that would lead to the liberation of Paris.
And the Auster Club has a great friendship with the Flying Club at Falaise, and they've been going there every 5 years, I think, since the late part of last century.
This special bond that the International Auster Club shares with the welcoming team at Falaise Airfield sees them honour the courageous actions of the little Auster AOP aircraft and their brave crews during D-Day. This year, marking the 80th anniversary, sees an impressive number of Austers flying in from across Europe, a testament to the enduring legacy of these aircraft and the men who flew them.
The Auster is a steel-framed aeroplane covered in fabric no thicker than your shirt, and there's no protection for the pilot, there's no armour plating. The only metal really is the engine and the frame of the aircraft. So In some ways they were very vulnerable. Machine gun fire, if it hit something vital, was pretty catastrophic, but equally a lot of the bullets that hit the aircraft would go straight through, and when the aircraft landed they would put a new patch of fabric on and the aircraft would be good to go. Their life expectancy wasn't great, though, it has to be said. Many Austers went to France and then followed the invasion right through to Germany, but very few started in France and made it all the way to Germany. They were lost en route, shall we say.
Flight time through my whole career is 24,500, but the most important is the 25 hours that I actually have on Austers. I just wanted to get back to basics, and you can't really get much more basic than an Auster.
Finally, in Normandy, Jerome and the International Auster Club can lay the wreaths he has carried throughout the journey. A tribute to the courage, sacrifice and enduring memory of the first Auster AOP crew to lose their lives in the D-Day campaign.
The laying of the wreaths was something that I wasn't aware was going to take place, and I felt very honoured to be invited to do so. There was quite a large group of people from the Auster Club who went along, and the wreath laying was on the graves of 2 Auster crew who were the first Auster crew to die. I think it was June the 13th, 1944.
Well, first of all, I'm going to lay the wreath, 2 wreaths, on the grave of Tommy Atkinson, leading aircraftman Tommy Atkinson, whose best friend is David Woodrow, also leading aircraftman in the RAF. And David Woodrow was 100 on Tuesday. And these 2 wreaths, one are from David Woodrow and the other from all his friends in the Norfolk area.
Unfortunately, about a week after he was shown the film and photographs of the wreath on the grave, he passed away, which is very sad, but his son contacted us and said that his father was extremely happy and proud that he felt that he had fulfilled his promise to his best friend that he would lay a wreath on his grave for every year that he could, and obviously that he'd made 100 years old. So in his son's words, his father felt that his mission was complete.
Now, here is a wreath from the International Auster Club for both Captain Leslie Vann, who was the pilot. He was Royal Artillery, and he was the pilot of the Auster. And the other wreath is from the Air Observation Post Association. So let's lay the one from the Air Observation Post Association first. Here is a wreath from the International Auster Club.
What I found out after the visit there was that the Army captain had actually gone over with American landing craft, with tanks, a tank landing craft, with some of the ground crew, so they could go ashore and find a field which the Austers could land in. And so they were there sheltering behind American tanks, actually on the beaches on the day.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age will not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them.
The observer was a leading aircraftsman who didn't have to be flying. He'd volunteered to fly to help. And their job, of course, was to sit there spotting for the artillery, flying very slowly and open to all the ground fire that's coming up towards them. Very brave guys.
Yeah. So they really were the eyes of the troops. And the Austers were the first aircraft there, and shortly followed by the Americans with their Piper Cubs.
And then the Kohima epitaph, which the Royal British Legion uses as well. When you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow, we gave our today.
Really find it quite emotional looking around it, and I find that when we had the epitaph read out, I could feel the tears trickling down my face. It's a very emotional thing. there's a lot of very young guys who, in fact, I can feel it now.
We brought 3 aged aircraft and 5 somewhat aged aircrew over here. It's been a long, difficult but incredibly rewarding journey, and as we are surrounded by one of the 23,000 Commonwealth War grave cemeteries, which must contain millions of graves, it is a feeling of respect and humility, I have to say, to be here.